Silence is not the absence of something. It is the presence of something most people never learn to wield. There is a particular kind of person who speaks less and changes rooms without saying a word, not because they are passive, not because they are afraid, but because somewhere along the way they learned something that most people spend their entire lives missing, that power does not always announce itself. Toxic people are loud by design. The noise is the strategy. Confusion, chaos, constant reaction, these are tools. And the moment you stop reacting, you remove the tool from their hand. But this is not about strategy in the manipulative sense. It goes deeper than that. It is about what happens internally when a person stops needing to explain themselves, defend themselves, or perform themselves for others. What follows are 12 patterns, not tips, not steps, but behavioral shifts that emerge in people who have done real psychological work, people who have moved from reactivity into something quieter and far more stable. If you have ever encountered someone like this, you likely remember exactly how they made you feel, not because of what they said, but because of what they refused to do. The first pattern is the refusal to justify. Most people operate under an invisible contract that says if someone questions your decision, you owe them an explanation. This contract is entirely fictional, and toxic people exploit it endlessly. They ask why, not to understand, but to create an opening, a gap through which they can insert doubt, criticism, or control. The person who has broken this conditioning simply does not fill that gap, not with hostility, with nothing, a calm, clean, non-response. Clinical psychology consistently observes that individuals with high boundary integrity show significantly reduced verbal justification behavior. They are not rude, they are simply no longer available for that particular negotiation.
The second pattern is the removal of emotional predictability. Toxic dynamics run on clockwork. They push, you react. They provoke, you defend. They disappear, you pursue. The moment that rhythm breaks, the entire system collapses. A person who has genuinely worked through their emotional triggers becomes to a manipulative personality essentially unreadable. And what cannot be read cannot be controlled. This is not coldness, it is the result of someone learning to feel things without immediately broadcasting them. The third is the willingness to let silence be awkward. Most people cannot tolerate an uncomfortable pause. They rush to fill it with laughter, with words, with apologies for nothing. Toxic individuals use this compulsion with precision. They create silence and then wait. The person who can simply sit inside discomfort without collapsing it has removed one of the most commonly used levers of social pressure. Therapeutic practice often reveals that the inability to tolerate silence is almost always connected to early environments where silence meant danger. Healing that association changes everything. Before we continue, take a moment to write these points down, not because you need to memorize them, but because writing forces your mind to process what it is actually recognizing rather than just consuming. And if this is landing with you, like the video and subscribe, because we make these for people who are genuinely trying to understand themselves and others at a deeper level. Share it with someone who might quietly relate. And leave a comment telling us what you think, or ask a question. We build new videos directly from what you bring to us. Check our channel for more of this kind of work. The fourth pattern is speaking once, cleanly, and not repeating. There is something quietly formidable about a person who says something once and does not chase it. No rephrasing, no louder repetition, no anxious follow-up to check if it landed. They said it, it is out there. What you do with it is yours to decide. This behavior disarms a specific manipulation tactic where the other person pretends not to understand, forcing constant re-explanation that slowly erodes the speaker's confidence in their own clarity. Stop re-explaining and the tactic dies. The fifth is allowing consequences to do the speaking. People who are psychologically grounded rarely threaten, they simply follow through or they don't engage at all. There is no performance, no dramatic declaration. A boundary is set internally, and when it is crossed, something changes. The interaction ends, or the access is reduced, or the silence comes. No announcement. Psychologists frequently encounter clients who, after years of threatening without acting, discover that acting without announcing is far more effective and far less exhausting. The sixth pattern is the mastery of strategic absence. Not stonewalling, not punishment, actual chosen withdrawal of presence. When a person who usually engages simply stops engaging, the effect on a reactive or manipulative personality is significant. The power dynamic shifts not through confrontation, but through absence. This is different from avoidance. Avoidance is fear-based. Strategic absence is grounded. One is running from discomfort, the other is conserving energy. The seventh is the disappearance of the need for the last word. This one is quiet but enormous. The compulsion to have the final word in an argument is almost always an ego protection response. It says, I cannot leave this unresolved because an unresolved interaction makes me feel like I lost something. The person who has genuinely released this compulsion is not performing humility. They have simply realized that winning the last word in a toxic interaction is like winning a game that should not have been played. They leave the table before the final round. Not theatrically, just genuinely done. The eighth pattern is what might be called neutral observation without rescue. Most of us are conditioned to respond to emotional displays with either matching emotion or de-escalation. Toxic individuals weaponize both. They escalate until you match them and use that as evidence of your irrationality, or they collapse until you de-escalate and use your soothing as confirmation of their narrative. The person who simply observes, without becoming emotionally hooked, without rushing to resolve, without performing, concern breaks both loops simultaneously. This is not indifference, it is the result of understanding that not every emotional display requires a response. The ninth is the quiet withdrawal of social proof. This is subtle and rarely discussed. When a person stops publicly validating, agreeing with, or endorsing someone they have grown psychologically distant from, the effect is registered, often deeply, even when nothing explicit is said. No confrontation, no explanation, simply the removal of visible affiliation. In environments where social currency matters, this registers more than any spoken criticism. The patterns you repeat today quietly shape the boundaries of your inner world. The 10th pattern is the refusal to speculate out loud. Toxic conversations are full of, what did they mean by that? And do you think they're angry? And what should I say? The person who has moved beyond reactive psychology simply stops speculating out loud. They may observe, they may form private assessments, but they no longer participate in the group processing of uncertain social dynamics. This removes them from several forms of manipulation simultaneously. Gossip loops, triangulation, second-hand emotional involvement. Jungian psychology would frame this as reclaiming projection. You stop outsourcing your perception and start trusting your own internal read of a situation, quietly. The 11th pattern is the steadiness of someone who no longer needs to be understood by everyone. This is perhaps the deepest behavioral shift on this list. Most chronic people-pleasing behavior, most over-explaining, most exhausting social performance, all of it runs on the same engine, the belief that being misunderstood is a problem that needs to be solved. Therapeutic practice often reveals that the moment a person genuinely releases the need for universal understanding, their behavior changes so profoundly that the people around them experience it as a kind of transformation. They seem different, calmer, harder to read, impossible to manipulate through social disapproval. Because that weapon requires a target who cares, and this person has quietly stopped caring in the right way. The 12th pattern is simply being difficult to destabilize. Not rigid, not defensive, just grounded in something internal that does not shift when social conditions shift. This is the end result of all the preceding patterns working together. When a person cannot be rushed into a reaction, cannot be guilt-tripped into compliance, cannot be confused by emotional noise, cannot be flattered into dropping their guard, something in the social environment reorganizes itself around them. Not through dominance, through solidity.
Here is what is worth sitting with. None of these patterns are performances. That is the critical distinction. Someone performing silence is simply using a different manipulation. What makes these behaviors genuinely formidable and genuinely protective is that they emerge from actual internal change, from doing the uncomfortable work of examining why you react the way you do, what you are actually afraid of, what old experience lives inside your current responses. The person who has done that work does not need toxic people to fear them. They no longer need anything from them. And that indifference, real, grounded, unperformed, is the quietest and most complete form of psychological protection that exists. Shadow psychology would note that the behaviors most toxic people project onto others, manipulation, coldness, superiority, are often simply the mirror of what they cannot tolerate seeing returned to them. When you stop reacting, they see themselves. And that is genuinely uncomfortable for a person whose entire identity is built on the reactions of others. Silence, in this sense, is not a tool, it is a consequence. The consequence of someone who has done enough internal work to no longer need the noise. If this perspective resonated with you, consider liking the video. Subscribe for more psychologically precise explorations like this. Share it with someone who might quietly relate to what was said here. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss future deep dives into the hidden architecture of human behavior.